New haircut, new attitude. Or should I say, more attitude, because today we're going to be talking about Rockwool. But before we sign off, let's have a listen to what two other growers say about Rockwool and whether they would grow in it. Often people will buy Cymbidiums, especially grown in Rockwool, and what should they do about it? Should you repot immediately? Should you wait till your orchid's finished flowering and then repot it? Because believe me, I can tell you 100 ways you're going to kill your orchid by growing it in Rockwool. That's not to say that you can't or that it's not a good media, but let's have a look at what Rockwool is first. Rockwool is actually an insulation material. It's used often in roofs to insulate your ceiling so that you don't get all that cold air coming through. And what's going to happen if you get a leak in your roof and your insulation gets wet? You're going to have to strip it all out, and possibly your ceilings too, because all it's going to do is cause mold and cause your ceilings to rot and fall through. So it's really got to be done. You can't just leave it out there hoping it's going to dry, because it really doesn't. Rockwool holds a lot of moisture. Even though it does drain incredibly well, it holds that moisture inside of it for long periods because of that insulation effect that it has. So your water is going to be sticking and staying in the center of it. Although the outside is dried off, it's going to hold that moisture in the middle of it. And if you are unable to control your watering, you're going to do exactly the same as what wet insulation is going to do to your roof. It's going to rot the roots. So this is why I always say, if you buy your Cymbidium, especially Cymbidiums, because they will often come in it, is to repot it. Because although it is an excellent media, it does drain incredibly well. So all it does is hold moisture. It doesn't hold water. It is completely inert. So it has no effect on the pH or the feed that you're going to be giving to your orchid. It's also not going to decompose. So it can last an incredibly long time. So you may not have to cause too much damage repotting your orchids by just pulling it out and adding more Rockwool around it to repot it up into a bigger pot. But it's the management that's going to be difficult. For all of these factors, to control your watering is going to be extremely difficult, especially if you're growing outdoors. You can't control the rain. So that's why generally these growers that do grow them in Rockwool have these beautiful covered greenhouses where they can manage the water to the milliliter. But also remember that Rockwool has absolutely no organic component in it, so it has no ability to feed your plant. So all the feeding that you're doing to your plant has to be done through your watering. And if you're not managing your feeding properly, you're going to land up with massive amounts of salt buildup in your media, well, in that Rockwool, and that's going to be extremely detrimental to your plant. So that's why I always say the general home grower is never going to be able to manage the growing of their orchid in Rockwool as what these big commercial growers do, who have everything managed down to the T, being it the watering, the humidities, the temperature, the feeding. Everything is carefully managed and controlled so that your orchid can always look its best. And remember, they're not always growing for the long term. They're growing for the flowering, so that after flower, or as the flowering happens, they can then sell it on to you. And then growing in Rockwool is also going to make it easier to manage disease and pests. Since it is completely inert, you're not going to get the same sort of fungal growth as you would in an organic media. And by treating it, you can easily treat it using fungicides and that. So it makes sense for the commercial growers to use it. But as I said, the amount of water it holds, especially if you get 1 week of rain or 1 week with rain every day, you're going to start building up too much moisture in your media and start rotting your roots. So when should you repot your orchid? You've bought your orchid and it's got a beautiful flower spike on it, or some of those flowers are already open so that you know what color it is. You keep growing it in that media until those flowers are finished. because if you start repotting it now immediately, you're going to start shortening the lifespan of those flowers by shocking your plant, or you may knock it off in your manhandling trying to repot it. So you wait for that flower to finish, and as soon as that flower is finished, zip zap, you can open it up. But always remember, when working with Rockwool, you've got to be careful, because it is fine fibrous expanded rock fibers. You've got to be careful breathing it in. It can be damaging to your lungs, and also those fibers can stick into your fingers, similar to what fiberglass is going to do. Always wear protective gear. And another way of doing it is ensuring you only work with Rockwool when it is damp. That's going to help reduce some of those detrimental effects. It's going to have less likelihood of you being able to breathe in those loose fibers and things. So work with it when it's slightly damp or wet, and ensure that you're wearing a mask and preferably gloves, so that you can be safe when using it. Generally, it is going to come off your plant relatively easily, especially when it is wet. Often you'll just be able to rinse it off and just carefully pull away that loose fibrous mesh that it makes, and it's generally quite easy to remove from your roots without causing too much damage. And then when it comes to repotting your Cymbidium after that, we've got a couple of good videos on that. We'll leave those in the description box down below so you can have a check out on those. Also remember, Ed posts up a lot of information in that Buy Me a Coffee link. It's all in easy to understand, itemized form, which makes it easy to follow and quick to understand. So be sure to go check that out. But before we sign off, let's have a listen to what 2 other growers say about Rockwool and whether they would grow in it. So let's give you to Amalia from God's Green Gifts and Jeff from Mighty Fine Orchids, and hear what their take on Rockwool is. I hope this gives you a better understanding of whether you can use it for your own growing. And we're here with Amalia from God's Green Gifts. And one of those green gifts that she's so good at growing are these Cymbidiums. And we're getting a lot of you asking about, what do you do about Rockwool? Is it good to keep your Cymbidiums growing in Rockwool? Let's hear what Amalia has got to say about this.
So it's one of those contentious issues again about some growers grow in this, some growers grow in that. But what it boils down to is where you live, what your area is like. Are you in a humid, wet area? So for us in Durban, Rockwool is a no-no because it holds too much moisture and you rot your roots. It's also one of those things that it's either too wet or too dry. So if you're growing all your plants on Rockwool in a controlled circumstance, in other words, you've got a covered greenhouse where you can control the temperature, the amount of watering, then it's going to work. But if they're growing out in the garden, you're going to find you're going to rot your roots. So you really do need a lovely draining mix so that those roots get wet and then that water drains right through if you're in an area that's quite humid and wet like Durban. So it all depends on.
So, and how would you suggest is best to go about repotting your orchid once you've got one in Rockwool?
So I always think like right now, just get it out of the Rockwool in Durban straight away and then plant it into a nice draining wood chip. I use wood chip and perlite and a lot of DZ gravel or the bluestone, just because that doesn't break down, and it's really difficult to get a good decent wood chip now. But general rule of thumb is always in spring to repot, but for me, get it out of the Rockwool now. Just save your roots.
That's always what I suggest as well. Take it out the Rockwool, especially if you're growing outdoors, because you can't control the rain.
And be careful, don't damage those roots. Remember that your roots are the way that the orchids get their nutrients and their moisture. So if you're smashing them and breaking them and cutting them, you're diminishing their ability to absorb water and nutrients. And they are only going to start to produce profuse new roots in spring. So just be gentle on those roots, but get as much of that Rockwool off as possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And again, here we're with Jeff from Mighty Fine Orchids, and we've seen those amazing first place winners that he got with his Cymbidiums, and we're going to ask him, what does he think about buying orchids in Rockwool, and what should you do with them?
Look, my personal opinion is that a lot of people do grow with it, and I just want to categorize first of all that if you are going to use Rockwool, but in any mean or form, you must use it and work with it wet. It's made with very fine, like glass fiber, and if you ingest it into your lungs and that, it's extremely bad for you. So be very warned that if you're going to use it, when I was using it, I used to make mine wet, and I used to sit and I used to grate it. But there's a Rockwool, which is like fiberglass needles, and then there's Cultiwool, which is a grey concoction like an almost exploded rock, but it's more like a cotton woolly. My personal feeling is I used to use it. I've gone away from it now. I'm using pine bark, which I use different grades according to the pot size, according to the size of the plant, etc. And also your conditions of where you stay. Here in Natal we get a lot of rain. That's the thing. So you can't use quite a dense mix because it's going to stay too wet. The Cultiwool, same thing. When we get 4 or 5 days of rain, they're going to stay wet, and you're going to start losing plants through the roots thing. I generally use a medium to coarse bark, which is a 10-15 is my medium, and then I've got a coarse which is about 25 mil, and then I'll blend it, and I'll put a bit of coarse river sand in there, but as coarse as you can get, chunky. If you want to put things in just to break it up a bit more, macadamia nut shells, peach pips work as well, bits of broken brick, also for porosity, and I put perlite in my mix, but I have an orchid bark mix that I use. I wash and clean a lot of bark, and I've used this for years, and that's my trick. And as I say, but my Cymbidiums, I do that. If you really want as well, another trick is sand your pots. If you put them on the floor on plastic, put down a layer of pine needles. You can pick them up all over the place, but you watch when those roots come out the pot and into those pine needles, they stay damp and wet, and they will spread like crazy. But then transport to your plots is another problem. That's your problem. So be warned. But you can put pine needles for a bit of acidity. I also put lime in my mixtures. I do use a lot of bone meal, and I put perlite as my new go-to. I don't use polystyrene anymore, and that's basically my little trick.
So you're just basically suggesting to take the
Take
Rockwool
them
out
out.
so you can manage the watering better.
Take the Rockwool. Be careful of the Rockwool. If you can manage it, it's under a dry roof condition where you can manage your watering regime. It's okay. But depending where you are in the world or South Africa, as to what you're watering, how often you water, how much natural watering do you get. It's the same with coconut husk. I mean, I used to use a lot of coconut husk in my mixes, but the quality, you get a good batch and you get a bad batch. And that also doesn't last. Sometimes it's only lasting 18 months and it's breaking down. But it's very high porosity with water. You take a chunk and you squeeze it a week later and you can squeeze the water out of it. So if you are going to use it, moderation. But I would generally say take out of the Rockwool and out of the coconut husk and put them into bark because it's more manageable and more controllable. The biggest problem is women have got this heavy hand that they want to kill things with kindness, except for us guys that need food. Little skinny white boy. But ideally, they want to always water. So rather put them into a bark mix and you've got better drainage and better thing. The Rockwool will stay too wet and you're going to get root rot, and then suddenly all the leaves are going to go yellow and you're going to pick them off like this. Same with the phalaenopsis. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.